Greetings and salutations, everybody. It's E. Spencer Kyte, SevereMMA, your friendly neighborhood Spencer man, here on Thursday of Fight Week, which means one thing. Well, really, it means 10 things. As the banner implies, we are here for 10 things I like about UFC Vegas 63. As I talked about yesterday, this is a classic hangover card, right? A collection of different fights with sort of limited stakes, cobbled together in the wake of a pay-per-view. And not just any pay-per-view, right? UFC 280 was the best pay-per-view to date thus far this year. And so the assembled talent here for Saturday isn't exactly the greatest representation of skill in the UFC. We saw that last week. We'll see that in a few weeks at Madison Square Garden for UFC 281. And for now, we're sort of left with the chef's salad, if you will, of UFC talent. Now, to be fair, this card lost two different fights that were very good fights. Edson Barbosa versus Ilia Topuria was supposed to be on this card, as was an excellent lightweight matchup between Drakkar Klose and Mark Madsen. And so if those fights are on this card, we're looking at a very different main card. We're looking at a very different sort of perception of this card. Yes, it's still not absolutely stacked. It's not a banger of a fight night event, but it's much better than it is. Those things fell off. That being said, this main event is still outstanding. There's still a couple fights that have some sort of back end of the divisional rankings ramifications. And then there's a couple prospects that are worth getting another look at. And so my hope is that on Saturday, this one clears the already low bar that has been set and turns into one of those. And then it turned into a really fun night of fights kind of situations that we have every once in a while, right? Nobody's expecting a ton. Let's hope we get some good fights. As it is, these are the 10 things I like about UFC Vegas 63 on Saturday. Item 1, somebody made flashcards. Calvin Kattar getting right back in there. In an era where we see so many top-ranked fighters fighting once or twice a year, squatting on their rankings, trying to cherry pick, look for the best kind of matchup possible and pick and choose and all of that. Here's Calvin Kattar 4 months after a contentious split decision loss to Josh Emmett in July in Austin, Texas, jumping right back in there with a guy that's 9-0 in the division, or 9-0 in the UFC, I should say, on an 11 fight winning streak overall. Doesn't matter that he's a spot behind him in the rankings. Doesn't matter that Kattar's coming off a loss and 2 straight losses, puts you way far back. He's back out there on Saturday because that's who he is. That's what he does. And it's great to see. The other thing, when I say that's who he is and that's what he does, there's no denying it. There's no questioning it. Because here's the slate that Calvin Kattar has fought thus far in the UFC. Started with Andre Fili, then Shane Burgos, Renato Moicano, Chris Fishgold, who is sort of the one outlier, but Fishgold was a good fighter in Cage Warriors. He was coming off a loss. Kattar was, so we understand. Ricardo Lamas, Zabit Magomed Sharipov in a main event. Jeremy Stevens, Dan Ige, Max Holloway, Giga Chikadze, Josh Emmett, and now Arnold Allen. This is Kattar's 5th consecutive main event. It's his 6th main event in the UFC. All he's done throughout his career is take fights like this. And regardless of what the rest of the card looks like, regardless of your feelings about where he is in the division, things like that, that kind of resume, that kind of approach, especially given what we see now more frequently, deserves respect, deserves recognition, is absolutely a thing that I like. Item number 2, Arnold Allen's push for a title shot. You remember in March, after Arnold Allen beat Dan Hooker very quickly in London and called for this fight, this exact fight with Calvin Kattar, myself, Ian, Harry, I believe Sean on the UFC London live stream all groaned. We didn't want it, right? Because Arnold Allen is, as I just mentioned initially, 9-0 in the UFC, an 11-fight winning streak overall. He's 28 years old to be 29 early next year. You shouldn't have to win 10, 11, 12 fights before you're in title contention. It shouldn't be that way. Now, part of the reason it is that way for Arnold Allen in this case is because injuries and being unavailable, just generally speaking, at different points throughout his career have sort of stalled this climb. The results have been there, the success has been there, but the availability hasn't been there to match kind of the push someone in his position would probably normally get. The other side of it, however, is that this is just the way the UFC has been operating the last few years. We've had 3 fights between Alexander Volkanovski and Max Holloway at the top of the division. We've had other people, including Calvin Kattar, that were on the way up, get put through the Max Holloway meat grinder and be unsuccessful. And so it's led to a very slow progression for someone like Arnold Allen, who probably should have had a fight like this after beating Sadiq Youssef. He shouldn't have had to fight Dan Hooker in London. It should have been somebody like Kattar, somebody like Yair Rodriguez, Brian Ortega, so that victory could have been the one to propel him to championship status or contender status. But this is where we are. And so as much as I don't like the road and as much as I don't like what I think is still going to be another 1 or 2 fights before he's fighting for the title, especially given that we don't know what's happening with Alexander Volkanovski right now. And it seems that the champion will be going up to lightweight to challenge for that title. I at least like that he's here, right? I at least like that it's the end of October and he's fighting for a second time, and it is someone ahead of him in the rankings. It is that kind of test and that kind of opponent that you need to beat in order to convince the folks that haven't been watching, the folks that don't know how good Sadiq Youssef is or how good Dan Hooker is, that you are deserving of, if not a championship opportunity next, facing one of those 2 or 3 other people that are in that conversation, being Yair Rodriguez, Josh Emmett, and Max Holloway. But God, I don't want to see Arnold Allen have to go through the Max Holloway cycle. I'm at least happy he's here. I don't like the road that it's been. I don't like how long it's taken. I don't like that it's beat Dan Hooker and now face number 5, because it feels like number 3 or number 2 is next. But I'm happy he's here. I'm happy he's getting a main event. I'm excited to see what he can do against somebody of this caliber on Saturday. Item 3, Max Griffin's late push. We see this from time to time. It's more prevalent, I would say, in stick and ball sports than it is in MMA. It's not often in MMA that somebody sort of in their mid to late 30s really puts it together and makes a run, right? We see in different sports at times, somebody that was injured for a long time kind of gets healthy and has a nice season or two. Somebody that was stuck in the minors and just couldn't break a roster suddenly, finds a role, finds a position, finds a place on a team, the right opportunity, and they succeed and they thrive and they have some success. Max Griffin feels like he's having that a little bit. He's been around the UFC for a number of years. The success hadn't always been there. It'd been very inconsistent. He'd lost more than he had won prior to the last couple of fights. And now here he is on a nice little run, right? I know he comes into this fight off a loss. It's a split decision loss to Neil Magny in a very close fight that, as I said yesterday on One Question, creates an opportunity to see if he can find the 1 or 2 things that he needs to do to close those gaps and continue taking steps forward. Because the win over Ramiz Brahimaj was good. The knockout of Song Keenan was great. The victory over Carlos Condit is a good win. Despite Carlos being at the end of his career, it's a good win. It's the kind of fight that Max Griffin wouldn't have won 2 years prior. But he's at a point now that he's capable of winning that and capable of nearly beating, and in some people's scorecards, beating Neil Magny last time out. And so this weekend he's got Tim Means, another sort of veteran guy in that durable, dangerous, lives in the second 15 at welterweight, maybe just outside the second 15 at welterweight. That's a good test that you go out, you win this one, and you're back in that conversation of facing the guys, in my opinion, at least, of facing those people in the lower third of the top 15. And that's like, at this point of his career, at this stage, given everything that came before it, that's a win for Max Griffin. That's a positive. That's a getting to the best step possible, getting to the best place possible at a stage in your career when most people don't get to have this kind of run. I've had a chance to talk to Max a lot. I think he's a good dude. I think he's a good fighter. I'm happy to see this. It's been exciting to watch. It's been fun to chronicle over on UFC.com through a bunch of different conversations. Looking forward to seeing him out there on Saturday. Item 4, Dustin Jacoby making the most of his second chance. So Jacoby had 2 fights in the UFC a number of years ago. He lost to Chris Camozzi and he lost to Clifford Starks. And then he went and he had a couple other MMA fights, but he really focused on his kickboxing. Went over to Glory, had some success there. And a couple of years ago, he kind of basically said he was ready to come back to MMA. That was where the opportunities were. He won a 1-night, 3-discipline tournament, fighting at heavyweight, I believe. And it got him basically a shot on the Contender Series. So he showed up 2 seasons back now on the Contender Series and beat Ty Flores, who is a prospect out of the Elevation Fight team. He was unbeaten at the time. It was a good win. It wasn't a finish. It wasn't this battering. It was just a good, hard win from a veteran guy. And it got Dustin Jacoby a chance to compete in the octagon again. Since then, he's gone 6-0-1, and he enters Saturday's fight on a 4-fight winning streak and ranked number 13 in the light heavyweight division. And you can see the smile coming to my face because these things aren't supposed to happen. This isn't how these things are supposed to go. You don't get second chances like this and then you don't make the most of them, right? Most of the time that we see athletes return to the UFC, especially after a number of years away, it's for 1 or 2 fights. Maybe if they're lucky, they have a little run and they stick around, but you don't generally climb into the rankings. You don't suddenly start making a move towards the top 10. But Jacoby has. Part of it is, a great deal of it is because he's put in the work. He's developed his game. He's improved as a fighter, as an athlete. He's matured as a man and as a competitor. And it's really great to see. Like, I get that it's not the biggest fight. I get that he's not the biggest name. But these stories and these moments are things that I love and the things that as a sports fan, I look forward to seeing. Like, if this guy continues to win, and I said this a couple fights back, if he continues to win, he's going to be fighting dudes that you really care about in this division pretty goddamn soon. And then you're going to have to start paying attention. And then you're going to get there and be like, oh, that's a cool kind of story. So get there now. Be here with me now, appreciating this second run of Dustin Jacoby and what he's doing as he goes into Saturday night. Item number 5, the duality of Khalil Rountree Jr. So Rountree Jr. is who Dustin Jacoby is fighting. It is the opening fight on the main card on Saturday. It is my second favorite fight on the card behind the co-main event. And what I mean when I say the duality of Khalil Rountree Jr. is that outside of the cage, and when you sit down and speak with Khalil, or you see him speak. There's actually a really great origins piece up on the UFC website, also the UFC YouTube page, about sort of Khalil's path to MMA, his journey, the hardships that his family went through with the loss of his father when he was 2 years old, the depression, being overweight, suicidal thoughts, all of the stuff Khalil mentioned in his post-fight speech after his last victory is in there. And it's a very well done piece. And I think you should check it out. If you watch that, you see a well-spoken, engaging, charismatic, the kind of guy you want. Like there's a magnetism to Khalil Rountree Jr. And he and I have had several conversations for stories. And I say conversations because they're not interviews. We sit down and we have 20 to 25-minute calls just talking about life as it pertains to MMA most of the time, but sometimes just life. And they're fascinating to me, and I look forward to them. And then you see Khalil Rountree step into the cage. And you see the fight against Modestas Bukauskas, where he throws the oblique kick and buckles Bukauskas. And you see his last fight against Karl Roberson, where he comes out in the second round and it's like he just said, I'm not fucking around with this guy anymore. And he hits him with a left hand that puts him down. And he kicks him in the midsection while he's down. Beautiful, perfectly placed, heavy soccer kick to the midsection that kind of seals the deal. And there is a ferocity to Khalil Rountree. And it's such a stark contrast to who he is when you sit and speak to him, to who he is basically every moment that he's not in there actually fighting. Those things are fascinating to me. It's actually something I look forward to speaking to him about even more, because flipping that switch is difficult. It's a thing a lot of athletes have talked about. I'm not able to just switch on and be the killer, the aggressive person that I need to be when I walk out there, because I am so many other things and not that in the rest of my life. But it's fascinating to see. And I really look forward to every single time Khalil Rountree competes, because seeing that duality at play, seeing that switch get flipped, it truly does leave me at a loss. He is a vicious, dangerous, ferocious man inside the cage with a phenomenal story and an absolute magnetism to him. Can't wait to see my guy compete on Saturday. Item 6. Middleweight moving fight between Phil Haas and Roman Dolidze. I love fights like this. One way or another, one of these guys moves forward, right? The winner moves forward. We are at a point with these two athletes where we need to figure out which one of them goes forward. Phil Haas has been mostly successful in the UFC since arriving off the Contender Series a couple seasons ago. His one stumble was against Chris Curtis at Madison Square Garden last year. Since then, he responded with a absolute drubbing, mauling, trucking, whatever word you want to use, over Deron Winn. And now he's positioned against Dolidze, who started his UFC career with 2 wins at light heavyweight, dropped down to middleweight, and lost a very boring, very uneventful fight to Trevin Giles. Then won a very boring, very uneventful fight against Laureano Staropoli. And then last time out, marched across the cage, worked into the clinch, and hit Kyle Daukaus with an absolutely perfect knee to the face that, unfortunately, Kyle, sorry, my guy, shattered his orbital and left him on the sidelines for a while, but was a beautiful knee. And so now they're side by side. They're running parallel in a division that always needs new names, that always needs people advancing. that could use some fresh talent being thrown into the sameness that is the top 15. And I think this fight will help decide which one of these guys goes forward a little bit. Not necessarily into the rankings, but just into that step forward. Maybe they fight a ranked fighter next. Maybe we see a little something from one of them that tells us there's still something more here. And sometimes you just need fights like this. It's a good fight. It's the right matchup at the right time for both guys, and it should be a good one. Pardon me. Item number 7. Andrei Arlovski, still marching on. Listen, I turned 44 on Sunday, and so old dudes like Andrei Arlovski, who turns 44 in February, always going to make this list. Just because to still be doing it at this age is one thing, right? Like, that's to be competing at this level at his age, impressive enough. To be on a 4-fight winning streak at his age at this level is another sort of notch to this. And then to think back to the myriad times that we have written Andrei Arlovski's obituary for him to still be here, I got to give it up to him. He's got to be in this list. And it's not because there's a dearth of options. It's because, Jesus, man, this dude's 43 and we've thrown dirt on him 3 or 4 times. And yet here he is. He's done the right things because he wants to still compete, right? I talk about this with Jim Miller in terms of Jim Miller all the time. Wants to continue competing, knows he can't compete against the absolute best in his division, and says, great, who is it that I got to fight? Just give me them. I want to keep competing, so give me the guys that I match up against. Most people go on a 4-fight winning streak and they're going to be arguing that they want to fight bigger names and all like that. You haven't heard that from Andrei Arlovski. He's accepted this fight and fights on Saturday against Marcos Rosario de Lima. It's not a big fight. He didn't go out there and say, I want a top 15 guy. I'm close to the just wants to compete, man. Just wants to test himself. Still loves it. Still enjoys it. Likes training. Likes fighting. I like watching him fight. I like seeing the old dude out there doing some of the old dude stuff, right? I said it yesterday. He's got a little bit of that, like, crafty, sneaky, pulling the little tricks that he can. He's like the old guy at the Y beating the young dudes on the basketball court because he's got 17 post moves and a bunch of head fakes and a little bit of ball shimmying and got a little shuffle to him. Doesn't have the athleticism. Can't get up like he used to, but he'll outcraft you. I like craft dudes. I'm 44. I'm becoming a craft dude. I don't have any athleticism left. I got to rely on gamesmanship and experience and figuring out how I fit in and where I fit in. And so, shouts to Andrei Arlovski. Look forward to seeing the Pitbull back out there on Saturday. Here's to us old heads. Item 8. Post-hype Chase Hooper. So, I'm a big fantasy sports guy. And one of the terms that gets used in fantasy sports a lot at the start of the year and also throughout, but largely as we're getting into seasons, is folks are called post-hype sleepers. So what that means, generally speaking, is at one point they had a lot of buzz. That person, everybody, all the experts were telling you to watch out for, everybody was paying attention to, and for one reason or another, it didn't work out. And now all that hype has died down. All that attention is gone. And here they come, and there's somebody you still got to pay. You maybe want to pay attention to again. And I think it applies to Hooper here. So he got a developmental deal as an 18-year-old on season 2 of Dana White's Contender Series. And then he went away for a year and he fought on the regional circuit. And he made his debut at the end of the year, a December pay-per-view card against Daniel Tamer, and got a victory. And there was some buzz, right? There was some, like, it was a first round finish. He's got this mop of hair. He looks like he's, just finished his AP calculus class. Like, doesn't look like the kid that should be in the UFC. And that brought attention. And that attention brings pressure and all of those different things. And it brought a second fight of his UFC career against Alex Caceres. And it went the way you would think a fight between, I think he was 19, maybe even 20 at the time, Chase Hooper, and a 20-fight veteran, Alex Caceres, would go. And now here we are a few years removed. And Chase Hooper is 23. He's growing into his body. He's gaining some strength. He's doing some training with other gyms and other camps. And there's not as much of a buzz. There's not as much, he's not on pay-per-view cards exclusively anymore. It's not the featured prelim. He's not getting all this extra love and attention or anything like that. And it's the best thing possible because he's still a very intriguing talent. He still has skills that I want to see develop and progress. And so this fight with Steve Garcia on Saturday is a chance to see some of that. He was my fighter of the week this week because he's somebody that I think we have kind of lost sight of or lost track of a little bit. But all the things that made us like him out of the gate on Contender Series are still there. He still has tremendous length for the division. His grappling is still very, very good. He's a legitimate black belt under Jeff Hoagland. And so I really like the fact that he's been able to navigate the spotlight, fall out of it a little bit, and still be here coming forward, improving without the pressure of it. So I want to see what that looks like on Saturday in the first fight for him in the UFC that feels like one where he's expected to win. Not that we haven't thought he could win some of these other ones. And to be clear, he's 3-2 in the UFC. So he's a fight to the good through 5 fights. But this is the first one where it feels like everyone is looking at it and going, this is the fight that Chase Hooper wins. So I'm looking forward to seeing it. Item 9, Bantamweight Christian Rodriguez. I mentioned yesterday on one question that this is a chance for Rodriguez to do the David Onama thing, where debut was up a division in a tough assignment and you looked good. You showed out, got my attention, got a lot of people's attention, had us throw in the asterisks, highlighting the name for next time. So this is next time. He's back down at Bantamweight. He's got a favorable matchup against newcomer Joshua Weems. And we get to see it, right? 24-year-old kid out of the Rufus Sport Camp. Duke hasn't been around nearly as much lately. The gym hasn't been producing as much talent as it did during its heyday, but still a good gym. As I said, he looked good against Jonathan Pierce in his debut. Just want to see it. No expectations, no big, oh my God, it's got to be X, Y, and Z, but looked good on Contender Series, has been pretty good on the regional circuit, held his own and had good moments against Jonathan Pierce, who has looked very good and is undefeated since going to featherweight. And so let's just see. This is why I pay attention to so many fights and take so many notes about people to remember for later and write things like Fighter to Watch and the long version of Fighter to Watch at the start of the year that details all the names that I want to remember. If I was doing it for next year, Christian Rodriguez would be in there because of that debut, and it would lead to this fight. And so it's been a condensed timeline, and we're getting that next fight. I'm eager to see what it looks like back in his natural weight class. Last one, item 10. I like Hangover Cards. I know I'm fully aware of what I said off the top, that it's not the greatest representation of UFC talent. It's not the most complete fight card you're ever going to see. These aren't super meaningful fights up and down the lineup. Sometimes I like just sitting on my couch and watching just fights that I don't have to be thinking about all of the storylines and all of the narratives and what does all of it mean. I just want to see people going out there with something to prove. People going out there trying to get their first UFC win, like Josh Fremd and Tresean Gore. I want to see, Waldo Costas Acosta, who I covered on Contender Series this year, make his UFC debut. I just want to see, fights that I can be kind of more of just a fan about. Like, yeah, I'm going to be recapping them on SevereMMA. I will have a piece up. I will have about last night's action up on Severe on Sunday. Absolutely. But I'm also going to have my laptop open and my tweet deck up, just enjoying fights with the community for the first time in a while. I don't have recap duty for UFC website. We're not doing any streams, anything like that. I just get to enjoy these fights. And to be honest, I like these cards. I like just cards with just fights, man. I don't have to overthink it. This is one of those weeks where I just get to go and be a fan and watch these fights without any big, what does it all mean to it? I'm not thinking about the takeaways and the next day takeaways. I'm just sitting back on Saturday and enjoying the fights. I hope you do as well. I hope you've enjoyed this. As always, thank you for watching. Check out everything else that's on the channel. Check out the Severe Patreon page. Subscribe to this. Follow everybody on Twitter. The boys all do a great job. Go give them your support. Sean Sheehan, Ian O'Neill, Quilcha, Andy, Harry, myself. We're trying to do good things here, great things here. We appreciate your support. We appreciate you following, checking everything out. I will be back tomorrow with the Severe Selections and the betting show where we got to get things going in the right direction. Until then, be good to one another. Be good to yourselves. Know that you're loved. We'll talk soon.